Hello all, welcome to the third session of 1052 Lease Accounting ASC 842 Enhancement. My name is Praveen Sharma. I am presenting along with Yang Chen and Ankap Namkesa. Our agenda for today is we are going to go over enhancement of monthly, non-monthly payments to operating finance schedules for standard calendar. And the second topic we are going to cover is the gross lease enhancement to operating finance schedule that will cover the initial adoption. The third topic we are going to cover is the initial right of use asset value processing, which is important for ASC 842, but will include a tenant incentive improvement, initial direct cost, and rental prepayment. And we also have coverage for index rent enhancements for ASC 842 that is based on index leases. Right now we are showing you how to apply minimum percentage for the gap leases. And the session ends with important defects and known limitations. So let me get into the first one. This is the enhancement that we did for monthly, non-monthly payments for standard calendar. Key features for this is important to note is that we have a standard fiscal periods record. Now it has a standard calendar boolean that should be checked as true. And now all of our accounting schedules, whether it is from ASC 840 or ASC 842, meaning straight line schedule, capital finance, or operating finance schedule for 842, all the net rent value, net rent payment column will be based on the due date of the payment. This is very important to note that all the net rent payment is based on the due date of the payment. And where will you find the fiscal period, standard calendar fiscal period? Will be going in the classification. Fiscal period records, there is a standard calendar record that is presented out of the box. The standard calendar boolean needs to be checked for this. So those two key things to be noted, but I'll get into the demo to show what exactly we are talking about here. For sake of this demo, I have a setup record and an activate record. So let me just get into the setup record and show you how to go about it. I have a lease with a commencement date of July 1st, 2016, ending June 30, 2020. Assuming all other information is entered, all we need to do is go to the generate payment on the payment schedule, go to the generate payment schedule. This is a monthly demo, and I have a follow-up to is a non-monthly demo as well. So get into the generate payment schedule wizard. I'm going to go with a payment type of rent, monthly frequency, and my full payment starts on July 1st, 2016 for $50,000, and I have number of schedules as 4 schedules, and every 12 months I am going to increase by a fixed amount of $1,000 per month. One key feature that you need to also concentrate here is the pay due on is by default it is specific day of the period, but we also do support first day of the period and last day of the period, which is if you choose first day of the period, if you have a monthly payment, then you basically paying on the first due date is the first of the month. If you are paying on the last day of the period, that means your due date is the last day of the month. For example, if you have January, February, and you're choosing last day of the period, your January first payment would be 1/31/2016. February would be 2/29/2016. It goes by calendar, based on calendar by calendar. But for sake of this demo, I'll leave it as specific day of the period, but I'm paying on the first of every month in this case. I'll go ahead and generate the schedule. And important to note is that include in amortization is by default checked, which is needed for our accounting schedules to be generated. I'll go ahead and create the schedules. I X out of this. I have all my payment schedules generated. I go on to the accounting tab. My accounting start and end date is as defaulted from commencement date and expiration date. I'm not going to change that. Changing the FASB type to building and land. Now you can choose, by default it is operating, but you can choose it to be, for the sake of this demo, whether it is operating or capital or finance or schedule, it really doesn't matter. All we are going to show is the net rent payment. So I'll leave it as operating, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on calculate lease statement so that I have a straight line schedule that is visible, and down below you will also see a schedule summary, right below the schedule summary section, an operating schedule being generated. But if you go back here and change it to yes and calculate this again, let me close the record and come back. No problem. I'll go ahead and leave it as operating. Leave it as operating. And I mean, what I wanted to show was that if you change that, it changed to finance lease statement, and below you will see a finance schedule. And you see this operating schedule. Now, I have my payment set, accounting tab set, dates are set. I'm going to save this record and click on activate. So once I activate this record, I do have a record to show after activation, same payment monthly, and I have accounting schedule has FASB treatment set. My straight line schedule is generated, and my operating schedule is also generated. The key thing to note here is that all these payments that you see here, net rent payment column, all this is based on due date. When I say due date, what I meant to say is the payment occurs between the period of July 1st to 31st. So that means if I have a payment between that date, the net rent column would show up all the payments with the due date of between the fiscal start and fiscal end will appear on the net rent column. That is the change. That's a monthly schedule, and that's the example for a monthly schedule. Like, it's all populated for all different month based on the due date of the payment. We take into account the due date of the payment. And the same change applies to also for the operating schedule. Same thing goes for all. So this is the monthly part of the demo that I wanted to cover. There is also a non-monthly part. Let me get into that. Again, I'll walk you through the setup. I have a commencement date and expiration date as 7/1 and ending at 6/30/2020. I don't have any payment schedule. This example, I wanted to show you an example of a quarterly schedule, which we typically call it as a non-monthly schedule. And I choose a frequency of quarterly frequency, and typically it's like rent is being paid every quarter, and my full payment start date starts on 7/1/2016. It also indicates me that my quarter is also starting on 7/1/2016, and each quarter I am going to pay $150,000, and I'm going to generate 4 schedules, and every 12 months I'm going to increase by 1,000 every quarter, right? And I mentioned in earlier demo about monthly, the payment due on, there is also option now available for first day of the period, last day of the period. In case of quarterly, if it is the first day of the period, then your payment due date is on first of the month, meaning first of the first month. So for example, I'm starting on 7/1/2016. My quarter starts on 7/1/2016. My next quarter starts on 10/1. So I will have a payment line item of 7/1. Then I will have a payment line item of 10/1. But had I choose last day of the period, then my payment would be at the last day of the quarter. So in this case, my quarter is beginning on 7/1 and ends on 9/30. And that means my last day of the period is 9/30/2016. And then it goes on based on the last day of the period. For sake of this, I'll leave it as specific day of the period. I have everything set here, and I'll go ahead and generate the schedule. It generates 4 schedules up till 2020. Each schedule is for 150 increment by every quarter increment by $1,000. I'll go ahead and create the schedule. I have the schedule ready, and I have accounting. In this case, my accounting period starts at 7/1/2016, ends at 6/30/2019. I use PAS-B treatment for billing, and I just want to calculate so that I can show my straight line schedule and for ASC 840, and I can show you operating schedule for 842. One other thing to keep in mind is this payment timing field is also there available on the accounting tab, and that defines whether you are paying in advance in arrears. But we use this field to calculate the liability, whether to use it to calculate the liability. I'll go ahead and activate this lease. And I have an activated lease already available with same set of payments and accounting. I'll go on accounting, and on accounting you will notice that since I am paying quarterly, my first payment is of, let me show you the payment. My first payment happens on 7/1. Next payment happens on 10/1. The other one happens on 1/1/2017, 4/1, like that. Every quarter, first day of the month, I am paying the payment. And it is important that on the accounting schedule, we record based on the payment due date. So my payment was for 7/1, so I have an amount that is defined for $150,000. For next month, next fiscal period, I don't have any payments in the system. So that amount is 0. And next month I don't have a payment, so that amount is 0. Then I have another payment that happens on 10/1, which is the October 2016. I have a payment. So it keeps on going, and so important to know that the change is that it's based on the due date. On due date of the payment, we basically we are abating the net rent payment, and that's for the straight line schedule. And the same fiscal line item, which is part of the same BO object behind the scene, is being utilized for operating schedule. The same thing happens, but in this case, you will notice that operating schedule is a year longer. So you will see that the payments are still being taken into account based on the due date after 2019. So the straight line schedule is for 36 period, and the operating schedule is for the 48 period. that was the change for, and one thing also to note is that even though I showed the example for a quarterly, but you can also do this for semi-monthly and annually. So we basically support any type of frequency, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually. And I also have at the in the slide mentioned there is a defect that we basically change the label of principal of a principal column to change in liability column in order to better represent what is my liability, whether my liability is actually increasing or it is going down. So if you notice here, this is actually through a defect. It will come on a slide for important defect. But if you see here, I have a minus 144. It's the behind the scenes formula really is the net rent minus the interest expense is what we were calling as principal. Now we relabeled is as change in liability value. In addition to that, we also multiply that by -1 to make a better representation for more in accounting work. And you will notice here that my liability is 2 million to 2.2 million, and I'm 2.2 million, and now here I made a payment of 150,000 here, and my liability should drop. So that means my negative. So it represents here as 2147. From 2292 it drops to 2147 because I made a payment. Then for the next two periods there is an interest calculation, but there is no net rent payment. But you will notice that the liability goes up for those two periods and drops down the third period where you pay the amount. This was more to better represent in an accounting world, and it's easier for us, easier to look at to see whether how the liability is going down, why it's going up and going down. And as it is, the liability drops down to 0 at the end along with the asset value. Let me go back to my slides. And that was for the demo for monthly, non-monthly payment for standard calendar. And Yang Chen will go over gross lease enhancements for operating finance schedule.
Okay, thank you, Praveen. Let me start sharing. Okay, so let's go through the gross lease enhancement to operating and finance schedule. If you haven't viewed the 1052 lease accounting gross lease and other lease accounting enhancement sessions, and also the 1052 lease accounting ASC 840 session, this portion of the gross lease is a continuation. So please view those sessions first. In this demo here, I'll be running through an initial adoption to show how the operating and finance schedule and walk through the schedules. With that said, let's dive right into it. Okay, so here I have some initial setup data. They're similar to our 840 data, but I just stated as a initial adoption. So in our 840 session, we've gone through the straight line and amortization. So now for 842, we're going to go through the operating schedules and do an initial adoption, and finance schedules to do an initial adoption. So here I have an initial setup record. So this record is similar to the old record in 840. So what we'll do here is an initial adoption So to do that, we do go through review assumptions. In the review assumption, action form pops up. In our review type, we would select initial adoption to new standard. And as you can see, on-chain workflow fills in the fiscal period where we're initially adopted in 2007-01 and fix that field. And for gross lease, here we are able to change any of our percentages that are going to be initially adopted. So for our time being, we'll leave it still at 85%. And we will submit this record. So on submit of the record, oops, let me fill in the finish the comments here. On submit of the record, the system is going to go through and generate for the new standard from 2017 onwards. So I have a record that's created, so let me show you that. That was operating. So here's an activated lease for gross lease. And as you can see, in our accounting tab, for this operating in a lease classification, our straight line will still remain the same. It will go through 2016-07 all the way through to 2020. And then, but in our operating schedule, when we do the initial adoption, it's going to start on 2017-01. And you will see it here. We also increased the borrow rate for 4%, and we'll see it here as initially adopted. Standard adopted, and adoption date is 01/01/2017. So here in the operating schedule, for our gross lease, we're still taking the base rent for our currently, we're using only base rent and none of the other categories. So the net rent will still be 85% of our 50,000, like we mentioned in the previous sessions. So our payment schedules is 50,000 for each month, and we're taking 85% of it. So for the rent component. In the rent component for the new schedule, if we drill into it, you'll see that our FOI, you'll see we're also doing a split of the non-rent values for maintenance, 2,500, basically the percentages that are broken out from 5%, 6%, 3%, 1% for the others, and you can see it displayed in the fiscal line items. Okay. So here, and then in the operating schedule, you can see that our our accrual liability is coming down to 0. And also the interest is coming down. So everything for our operating schedule looks good here. And then and amortization schedule. Okay, and then we want to show gross lease that is a finance schedule. So I have a record already created, same thing, similar to what we had for operating. So here our lease classification is a finance schedule, and we did an initial adoption and increased the borrow rate to 4%, and our current standard for amortization schedule is going to stay the same from 2016 fiscal period onwards, but our finance schedule is going to start from 2017-01 and go forth for our initial adoption. So as you can see, our asset value here is coming down to 0. with a few cents, and same thing as our net equity. So our gross lease, same thing. Inside this finance schedule, we're also just displaying the non-rent values for maintenance, tax, insurance. So for our gross lease, we're only taking consideration for rent. Okay, so that's initial adoption for gross lease. Let me go back to a PowerPoint. So NCAP now will go through initial right of use asset value processing.
Thanks, John. Now let me share my screen. So for the initial right of use asset value processing, there are three of the values that we are considering. So the key definition of each one will be presented here. So first of all is the tenant improvement. The TI is, again, is the cash incentive that paid by the landlord to the lessee to do some improvement to the space or, the lease that the space that they lease. Typically, it's a one-time payment, and it can occur before and or after the lease commencement date. So for the ASC 842 standard, for operating finance schedules, the TI is reduced from the net payment in the period that it is received. This will reduce the lease liability. So next value is the initial direct cost. The initial direct cost is the legal fee, like commission, executory costs that paid by the lessee to the lessor. IDC needs to be included in the asset value for operating finance lease on the inception of the lease. Only on the asset value, though. It's not affecting the liability. On the initial adoption to the new standard, the unamortized in the IDC will be added to the right of use asset value at the starting point. The next one is the rental prepayment. The prepaid rent is the rent that paid prior to the rental of the rental period. Tenant should record on the balance sheet the amount of the rent paid that has not yet been used. Typically, one or more one-time rental prepayment, it's not going to be reoccurring paid before the lease begins. The rental prepayment needs to be included in the asset value for operating finance lease on the inception of the lease. On the adoption to the new standards, any unamortized prepaid rent will be added to the right of use asset. So first, we just want to talk about the how to calculate the right of use asset value at the beginning. Any unamortized initial direct cost and rental prepayment, they would be added to the beginning of the right of use asset value. But the unamortized tenant improvement incentive would be subtracted from it. So this is only when the incentive was received before the lease commencement date. So if you see the formula below, you see that the beginning of right of use asset is equal to the net present value of the future rent payment plus the accrued liability from the prior period. In this case is 2016-12 because our look back period is 2017-01 if your adoption date is January of 2019. Plus the unamortized initial direct cost plus unamortized prepaid rent minus the unamortized incentive. So the tenant improvement incentive, I'm just gonna go through that first. For the setup, like I said in the ASC 840 enhancement session, we made the change on the general payment schedule. So if you have the TI that you got from the landlord, you can just add that payment schedule into your lease as the payment type as tenant improvement incentive. Once you do that, the summary type is changed to incentive, and the accounting type will be default as account receivable because you receive the money from the landlord. And the frequency usually is a one-time payment, and we introduced the include in upfront incentive flag, and it comes as default, as true, which is checked. If you uncheck that include in upfront incentive field, it means that you will not track that at the upfront, meaning you have to track that outside of TRIRIGA. When you receive the TI before the lease commencement date, you'll see that incentive schedule before lease commencement will be showing up. So for IBM TRIRIGA, we create the incentive schedule separately. So, you know, that's why you see this schedule showing up. And next, I'm gonna just go back to the system and show you how to add the tenant improvement incentive, which is before the lease commencement date. So I already have the record created. So for the tenant lease incentive that we get before the, that we receive before the commencement date. So the example of my lease is that I have a commencement date on 7/1/2016, and my payment is starting at $50,000 on the first day of the lease, and it is a 4-year lease, increase every year for $1,000. And now I receive the incentive from the landlord for $15,000 before I started, my lease starts. So it's a one-time payment. So, oh, sorry, I have to change that payment type to be incentive first. And once that changed, summary type is changed to incentive. Account type is changed to account receivable. And now I also have this include in upfront incentive as checked. I want to, you know, include this in upfront incentive that I receive from my landlord. And then it's a one-time payment that I receive before my commencement date. For $15,000, and just create this schedule. Close this, and then save the record. Go to now accounting tab. So when we look on the accounting tab, under the straight line rent schedule, that is another query section open up, which is incentive schedule before the lease commencement. This will not show up if you don't have any incentive that you receive before your lease commencement. So if I activate this lease, now I will get to the inception of the lease here. So on the accounting tab, go to your operating or finance schedule. So you see that because of the incentive you received before the commencement date. So now you see that your NPV is $2.3 million, but the current asset value is only $2.315. It is $15,000 less than the NPV value at the starting point. This is where it's subtract from the formula that I showed you before. So now that is one point. And then you still see that the incentive schedule before lease commencement will be calculated starting at $15,000, and it's divided equally until per period until the lease term is ended. So once the lease term is ended, that's when you don't have any incentives left over. So I'm just gonna go back to the slide again. So next we're gonna talk about the tenant improvement incentive. When we receive the money after the lease commencement date. So once you receive the money after the commencement date, there will be another schedule, which is incentive schedule after the lease commencement date. That will be calculated a little bit different. And also, when you receive the money after the lease commencement date, under the ASC 842, the incentive that will be reduced from your net rent payment in the period that it was received. And it will impact the total rent, so it will impact the lease liability as well. As shown in the screenshot here for the operating schedule, you see that in this scenario, in this example of the screenshot here, I have the incentive of, on the first period itself, I get the money from the landlord, $5,000. So that's my net rent payment for that month is $1,000, but I get the money from the landlord $5,000. So that's why the first payment itself, I have an amount of the net rent of a negative $4,000. Okay, I'm gonna show you in the system here. So first of all, we just gonna go set up the record. So on the payments, again, I have a commencement date for this lease at 7/1/2016. My payment is starting at $50,000 from 7/1/2016, which is the commencement date. And my lease is 4 years, increase every year $1,000. So now I'm just gonna add incentive. I receive incentive on the day one of my lease. It's upfront incentive, and it's a one-time payment that I get from the landlord. So at 7/1/2016, I receive $5,000 from my landlord. And I am told from the landlord that I will definitely gonna be getting another incentive a year later when I enter this lease. So I will have another incentive, which is another one-time payment on 7/1/2017 for $10,000 more. So once those are created, save the record, and then I go back to my accounting tab. Now I will see the incentive schedule after lease commencement is showing up. This will not show up if you don't have any incentive that is happening, that is received after, on the day of the commencement or after the day of the lease commencement. So if I were to activate this record, I will see something like this on my operating schedule or finance schedule. So on the operating schedule, because I received the money on 7/1/2016, which is the first period here, I would have paid $50,000, but because I got the money from the landlord, $5,000, so that's why I only need to pay $45,000. And again, on 7/1/2017, I would have paid $51,000 for that month, but because I get the money from the landlord for $10,000, so it's as if I have to pay only $41,000. And as you can see here, my incentive schedule after lease commencement will be generated, and it will start at $5,000, and another one will be at 2017 period for $10,000. And the accrual column here will be the $15,000, which is the $5,000 plus $10,000, divided by 48, which is the lease term, and it will be divided equally. So it comes down to $312.50. So the liability will be just the accrual or the incentive amount minus the accrual, and then you get the first one, and then it will amortize down until the lease term ends. So that is the incentive that we receive after the lease commencement date. And next is about the initial direct cost and the rental prepayment. So I'm just gonna go demo the initial direct cost and the rental prepayment in the product. Let me change the cut here. You know what? I remember incentive. So sorry, going back to the incentive, I would like to show you guys the incentive at the adoption. So the incentive at the adoption, when you do the before lease commencement date, when you receive the TI before the lease commencement date, when we do the adoption. So if I go to activate here, so once your lease is activated, now it's the adoption that you want to do. So let's say that your adoption is on January 1st, 2019. So I just go to review assumption and then pick the review type as the initial adoption to new standard. And now your fiscal period is now changed to 2000. It will be default to 2017-01, which is the look back period of January 2019. Look back period is 2 years. So let me put test here and leave other things as is and submit this record. So once I do that, I will get something like this. My step 3 here. After I do that initial adoption that I just showed you, and in this case, the amount that I have from 2017-1 at this period, so I have to look back whatever it was before, which is 2016-12. So now I still have that incentive left over of 13,125. So like I said in the formula, now my NPV is at $2.063 million. So now my asset is down to 2.04. My asset value is not equal to the net present value because this value is equal to my net present value plus this accrual liability, which is negative $9,000. And then subtract whatever leftover incentive, which is 13,125. So let me do the math for you here. So it's 2,060 here. Minus $9,000 minus 13,125. So this is what you will get on your asset value. 2,041,244.28. And this is at when you receive the money before the commencement date. So now go back to another case, which is after the lease commencement date. So again, if I have the lease activated, I'll do the initial adoption. Just click on the review assumption, and then on the review type, you just change that to be initial adoption, and fiscal period will default as 2017-01 if your adoption date that you set in the application setting is 2019-01. And I just do test here, and if I click submit here, then what I will get is something like this. If I go to accounting tab, so now my NPV is 2.053. So now my current asset value is actually 2.041. So it is the same. If I brought back the calculator here, if I have that amount, and then I'm going back here. So now the accrual liability at 2016-12, again, is negative 9,000. But my incentive leftover at 2016-12 is 3,125. So negative 9,000, negative 3,125. So now my asset value is only 2.041,392.98 cents. So that's for the initial adoption for both incentives that received before and also received after the lease commencement. So next is the initial direct cost and rental prepayment. So I'm just gonna go back to the system and then show you the initial direct cost and rental prepayment for ASC 842 standard. IDC. So at the setup, again, my lease is 7/1/2016 until 6/30/2020. My payment is $5,000 start on the commencement date and end 4 years after, and it increased every year $1,000. So now to add the IDC, just go to the accounting tab, and then I'll put IDC for $2,000. And sorry, wrong view. $2,000 here in initial direct cost view. And I'm just going to go back to the payments tab and then add the rental prepayment as a one-time payment. So if I leave the payment type as the rent, and then if I take the frequency to be others, my include in rental prepayment flag will be here, and I will check that so that it is this payment schedule is my rental prepayment. So now let's say I get that money, I will pay that money before my lease starts, which is 6/1/2016 for $3,000, and create that schedule. Now, if I save the record, go back to accounting tab again. Now you see that $3,000 is populated into my rental prepayment fee. If I were to activate this record and then just go to the next record here, just give some time. My accounting tab, my payment schedule is already scheduled, and then my accounting schedule is also generated. So for my net then, for my current NPV of rent, I will have the amount of $2.33 million. But if you see my current asset value, it is 5,000 extra, which come from the initial direct cost of 2,000 plus the rental prepayment of $3,000. And you see that the unamortized initial direct cost and unamortized prepaid rent liability will be generated. So for the unamortized initial direct cost, it will be equally divided until the end of the lease. And as well as the unamortized prepaid rent, it will be deducted until the end of the lease as well. So at the end of the lease, you will have nothing left. So this at the inception of the lease. So next, I'm just gonna do initial adoption. So on the review assumption here, again, if I do review assumption and the review type, I pick the initial adoption. And again, fiscal period will be default 2017-01. If you have the adoption date set in the application settings to 2019 January. And let me do test here and then submit. If I submit, then come back to this step. This is where I did the initial adoption already. So if I do that initial adoption, now my lease will start 2017-01 in my operating schedule, and you see that my net present value is 2.063, but my current asset value is down to 2.058. So what is that value is coming from? So I'm just bringing back my calculator here. So now we're just starting with the NPV calculation there. And at this point, if you go back to the straight line schedule, so for 2016-12, now we have the accrual liability of $9,000. So we have to sum that back, which is negative $9,000. And also, we still have the unamortized prepaid rent and unamortized initial direct cost left over. So now we also have to add that back. So for unamortized IDC is $1,750, and unamortized prepaid rent is $26.25. So it's plus $1,750 plus $2,625. So now coming down to the asset value of the new standard, it is 2.58744, which is the same value as this one. So that was it for the prepaid rent, initial cost, and tenant incentive. So next, I will be going over the index rent enhancements that we did for this release. For the contingent rent, the definition of the contingent rent is that it is a variable lease payment, that is the amount, which is the amount that is paid as part of the lease payment, but is not fixed or agreed in advance at the inception of the lease. But it's the amount to be paid is dependent on some future event. For example, of the contingent rent based on the price changes or the inflation index. The key information of this is that the lease payments that depend on an existing index or rate, such as the consumer price index or the prime interest rate, shall be included in the minimum of 4% lease. The new accounting standard for GAAP, the contingent rent is excluded from the minimum lease payment, and are accounted as expense in the period in which they are incurred as a variable lease payment. And for the new accounting standard for IFRS, the contingent rent is included in the lease payment when it occurs and recalculated the lease liability from the date forward. But for this demo, we only gonna present the minimum floor percent. We're not going to have anything to do with the variable lease payment in this release. So for the ASC 842, the impact on the new standard for GAAP is that the net rent payment is only impacted by the application of the minimum floor percent. And I will show you in a minute like how to set that up. On the application change, on the fiscal line item, the net rent field will have the minimum floor percent applied. It's just not the net rent amount, the rent amount that you get from payment schedule anymore. So I'm just gonna go back to the system and we'll show you how to set that up first. So for this example, my lease will start at 10/1/2013, and it will run until March 31, 2018. And my payment will have only one base rent for $50,000 that I pay monthly. And on the clause options and term tab, I will add a clause type as rent. And then you see this index adjustment here. I will check that. I will include index adjustment. So once that is checked, there will be index adjustment section showing up. And then you can pick the cost index. So let's say it's a CPI, cost consumer price index. And my base year would be 2013. And the base index is 100%. I'll adjust it monthly. I'll adjust it annually. The first adjustment would be 10/1/2014, a year after my lease started. This is where you can set up the floor percent to be applied on the net rent once the lease is activated. So the minimum 4% is, let's say it's 2%, and it cannot go over 4%. So, and then we'll also have to associate the base rent into this so that it knows the minimum percent will be adjusted on which payment schedule or which payment. So now we create this clause and save and close here. And on the accounting tab, we just have to change this to be building and land. And I want just to leave it as operating schedule. And also we have to set up accounting start and end date correctly, and then activate this lease. So if I activate that lease, what I will get is something like this. So like I said, my payment is $50,000 a month. But if I go to accounting tab here, on my operating schedule, you see that on the first, when I start the adjustment is on 10/1/2014, I have 2% applied on my base rent. So my base rent was $50,000, but I have 2% minimum, 12% applied. 2% of $50,000 is $51,000. So this is become my new rent for that period. So the next adjustment is, because I said adjust annually, so the next time that it will adjust again would be 2015 period 10. So I would have paid $51,000, but 2% of $51,000. Now my rent would become $52,000 and $52,020 there, and it will be going on like this every year. So the third year that it does the adjustment again, 2016-10, it will become $53,060.40 there. So now your net rent total will not be equal to your payments that you paid anymore. So if you see on the payments tab, on payments tab here, the PLIs, total of the PLIs is only $2.7 million. If you have paid $50,000 a month for your lease term, but on the accounting tab it will be more because you include that 2% minimum into your net rent. So it will now become 2.797, which is almost like $100,000 more than what you already paid. So that was the end of my index rent enhancement that we did for the ASC 842. Next, Praveen is going to go over the important defects and the known limitations for this release.
Thank you, Anka. I'll cover the important defects. 4 defects that I want to highlight, which are pertaining to 3 of them are accounting, and the 4th one is for index adjustment calculator. So the first one is 244402. I have already gone over this in, basically we had a principal column in our accounting schedule, which is visible on finance, operating, amortization schedule. Now we changed that label to be change in liability value, and also the formula change that went into that is the net rent minus the interest expense times the -1. This is more to better represent the corresponding liability value, whether it is going up or going down. The other defect that is also important to understand is the 244461, which is per new standard. There is a fair value less than NPV scenario that we used to have it in the system that was released in 10.5.1. We used to calculate the take into account the fair value equals to the asset value. But per the guidance, it seems like the new accounting standard, the fair market value, if it is less than the NPV, which is the liability, then the FMV, the system will not use the FME. Instead, it will continue to use the liability and asset value as starting liability and asset value for operating finance. This change is applicable only for ASC 842, because there is the guidance questions whether the fair market value, how you calculate it, has come up with a what is the basis of calculation. Additionally, we used to have 2 fields on lease classification, lease rate used, and also the estimated fair market value, and that has been removed from that section altogether. The following defect 24851 is the one that indicates that the estimated fair market value is removed from the asset lease section, and also the fair market value field that is defined on the FASB treatment section will be used to utilize the fair market value. So it's only one field. A lease can have one fair market value, so that's the change is there. And the final defect that is related to index adjustment. We have when a index lease is activated and an index adjustment calculator is generated behind the scene, there is an option to choose for the user to choose toggle between schedule amount and the last adjust amount. So we have removed that option today, and behind the scenes in the background we control it through the workflow logic. So if it's the first index adjustment calculator, it will always go after the scheduled amount. But if it is a second index adjustment calculator, it will always set to the last adjusted amount, and it will default the adjust payment on that index adjustment calculator. So those were the four key defects to note for. All three of them related to accounting, and one is an improvement of reducing the confusion for the user on index adjustment calculator. And I just want to show you the first one where that happened. The first defect that I was talking about, change in liability value. It's again for ASC 840, the change is impacted, but since it is operating lease, it's not visible on this, but it will be visible on amortization, that's capital or finance lease. But if you look at the operating schedule, you will see the change in liability value. This is the first defect that I am mentioning that was important. And the other one is that the fair value less than the NPV has no impact on the new ASC 842 standard. I can show you that. In my earlier session, I have impaired a lease while I was covering the 842 session, and my lease was impaired, and you see that there is only one fair market value, 1.6. But if you continue to look at the new standard ASC 842, I'm sorry, it should be not the impairment, the FMV less than NPV scenario. So now in this case, my FMV is less than the net present value in ASC 840, and it uses that starting value as 1.5 million. But if you look at the ASC 842 lease in the same record, we have not changed to use the asset value to be starting at 1.5. We continue to use the liability, calculated liability, and continue to use the 3% calculate the liability and continue to use the same asset value. So we didn't bring the fair market to begin at the asset value. That was the change. And the other thing is lease classification used to have two fields here: estimated fair market value and a lease rate calculated value. So both are removed from this section altogether. The fourth defect is about index adjustment calculator. I have an index adjustment calculator that is available for me. One of the records that I looked up for this defect demo. You will notice that in prior version there was an option to select scheduled amount, scheduled amount or you choose the last adjustment amount. That is gone, and by default, if I open up the first index adjustment calculator, it's always it is always going after the scheduled amount. If you open the second index adjustment calculator, it will always go after the last adjusted amount, meaning the first calculator is issued, the second calculator is open, it will take the adjusted amount that was done based on the first calculator. That's the change. That's the important defect to note. Back to my slide. And next is there are few known limitations that we are also bringing into this release, and they were there in earlier releases as well, but just to keep in mind the known limitation while you're working through the system. So the fair market value on lease or review assumption form cannot be negative. So a negative value could result in unexpected results. So be careful about that. And the interest expense calculation and accounting schedule calculations are using the simple interest method. So that's a key important thing to keep in mind. Those are the limitations today. And also we have another one is if there is an accounting start date and accounting end date are both on the last day of the period of the month, the liability does not reduce to zero. So you just keep that in mind. You probably cannot have Jan 31st as accounting start date and end date of a maybe another Jan 31 2-3 years down the line. So that's important to note. And release notes are available on the link provided on the slide. So it's a 10.5.2 TRIRIGA release notes in the developer works community. You can read more about release notes and more about the changes that are coming in 10.5.2. And we also have references. You can use the IBM Knowledge Center to get more knowledge about managing real estate leases, the topic to look for. That brings to end of this session for 10.2 lease accounting. Thanks for joining. I was joined by ANCAP and Yang Chen. Thanks, everyone.